UN Habitat and the World Thinkers Campus for the last 3 years. And this is a very unique event this time, I would say, because 6 partners globally, we came together and we decided to help each other, made a joint proposal to the Habitat for their COVID-19 series, which I'm sure Christian will talk a little more on that. And that's why we are here. And we chose a very, very important topic in the current context, especially for Chennai. Affordable housing was one of the themes suggested by the Habitat, and we decided to have housing for all for creating an inclusive, sustainable city, and that's why we are here. So I would just stop here, request Ram Kumar, the president of the Madras Chamber, to say a few words, introduce the chamber formally, and probably begin the program. He has had around 28 years of experience in the information technology industry as well as in academia, including that experience also includes his recent long innings with the Cognizant, where his current position is the chairman and managing director of Cognizant India. He is currently the president of this 184-year-old chamber, and he is a member of the National Executive Board of the American Chamber of Commerce, AmCham in India. He is also a member of the Governing Council of the NASSCOM Skill Sector Council, and a member of a host of other things. Can I invite Mr. Ram Kumar to say a few words?
Yeah, thanks, Saraswati, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to participants from all across the globe. And let me thank you for providing the Madras Chamber an opportunity to host this event. Let me also formally extend my welcome to each one of you. As Saraswati indicated, the Madras Chamber is the second oldest chamber in India. It was established in 1836. The chamber's original remit extended the entire Madras presidency, cutting across multiple states in the south of India, parts of western India, and right up to Odisha. In the context of COVID-19, I think it's pertinent to mention that the chamber has remained relevant to trade, industry, and commerce through multiple structural shifts as well as discontinuities over these 184 years. Interestingly, the chamber was operational during the Spanish flu, during the Great Depression, India's fight for independence, the Indian economic liberalization, and more recently, some of the transformative reforms of the government, including some very structural interventions in the form of GST, which is the One Nation, One Tax reform, the banking code reforms, so on and so forth. Let me quickly get to the topic. The Madras Chamber launched the Sustainable Chennai Forum as a very key initiative in the year 2011 during the Chamber's 175th year celebrations, with the objective of promoting a kind of a business case for sustainable development of the Chennai metropolitan region in collaboration with many like-minded institutions, many of those that are represented here on the call today. The focus has been on a few broad areas around energy, water, waste management, and transportation. During the last several years, we have engaged with different stakeholders and organized numerous conferences and seminars under the banner of Sustainable Chennai Forum. And many of our members, as well as the community at large, has greatly benefited from some of these events. As an associate of the UN Habitat from the year 2017, if I'm not mistaken, we have had 3 major conferences. I think the subject or the topic of these 3 conferences give you an indication of some of the challenges that we have attempted to discuss and to the extent possible solve them. One is making Chennai a global city. Second is a roadmap to zero waste in Chennai. And third, I know in the current context, the word positive has its own connotation, but we had a topic of making Chennai water positive. The topic, as you would see, were all aligned to the challenges around energy and water in the city, and by extension in the state. And many of you recollect that the state was power deficit a few years back and has at various points in time also had some serious challenges with water. That's the reason why these two topics resonated very well. But I'm happy to share that the state today is both power positive as well as water surplus, if you will. In UTC Series 2, we are focusing on many different sectors with our 6 partners that Saraswati mentioned earlier. I think it's truly global today, with our partners being the US Green Building Council from Washington, DC, the European Urban Knowledge Network from The Hague, the Regional Studies Association from Sussex in the UK, the National Institute of Urban Affairs, with whom we have had very long relationship and have engaged in very deep conversations, including attempting to set up an urban observatory with IIT Chennai, Shushan School of Planning and Development, Ansal University in Gurgaon, and of course, the Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Mumbai. Just a small trivia. I said while introducing the Madras Chamber of Commerce, I said that we are the second oldest Chamber of Commerce, established in 1836. The Madras Chamber was established on September 29th, and the Bombay Chamber was established on September 22nd, the same year. So they beat us by about 7 days to become the oldest Chamber of Commerce in the country. While many of our partners did touch upon broad topics such as climate change, financing recovery in the context of COVID, sustainable mobility, the Madras Chamber chose a topic of housing supply and affordability, which I'm sure that many of the speakers following me would demonstrate how relevant it is to Chennai from amongst the canvas of topics that were made available by the UN Habitat. On this theme, housing for all to create a sustainable and inclusive city, I thought I would probably make a couple of quick observations before I turn it over to the subject matter experts for the day. All of you know that Tamil Nadu is the most urbanized state in the country, with nearly half the population living in cities. This has been inching up with every passing year. Chennai, as a metropolitan city and the state capital, is one of the first 20 smart cities identified by the Government of India. The urban agglomeration, which includes the city and its suburbs, has a population estimated at about 9 million people, especially those joining the call from different parts of the world. You'll realize that many countries in Europe would enjoy a population similar to what Chennai and its suburbs enjoy. While in some cases, maybe Chennai would perhaps be even larger. And coming from the IT industry, I can tell you that the top 2 technology companies with operations in Chennai, just between the 2 of us, Tata Consultancy Services and Cognizant, we directly employ a little over 150,000 people. And if we were to look at the indirect employment, these 2 companies together would employ a little over 500,000 people, if not higher. So that's the opportunity that Chennai has provided to many of the large organizations with operations here in the state and in the city. And Chennai is the 4th most populous metropolitan area in India. And as I said, is the 31st largest urban conglomeration in the world. Just to drive home the point, the reason why the topic gains even more importance with some of these statistics. And equally important is the fact that of the total population, about 62% of migrants to the city are from the other parts of the state, given that the city has numerous industrial clusters. fine, whether it's manufacturing, automotive components, textile, leather, food processing, and of course, information technology. It tends to attract people from different parts of the state, from different districts. And 34% of the migrant population is from other parts of India, and close to about 4% from outside of India. I'm actually a little surprised that it still is only 4%. Obviously, we need to work on our social infrastructure. And as we were discussing before the actual program started, we don't have as many pubs as in Bangalore, and that may perhaps be the reason for the number of cases here being lower. Population growth in urban areas, especially in Chennai, has actually gone up substantially in the last 2 decades. And the major causes of rural-urban migration are predominantly search for better jobs, for different types of employment opportunities, as well as for business opportunities. This clearly has led to an increase in households, a formation of more nuclear families, and an expanding or a burgeoning middle class. As you know, several affordable housing schemes have been launched, both by the central as well as the state governments. But then I think the success rate has been a bit of a mixed bag. I'm sure that the experts would actually give you the reasons around it. But what is fascinating is that during the pandemic, the World Bank reached out to the state with 2 projects, a 200 million first Tamil Nadu housing sector strengthening program, as it's called, and a 15 million Tamil Nadu housing and habitat development project. Both these investments are largely to strengthen the state's housing sector, strengthen the policy framework, strengthen the institutions, and perhaps to relax the regulations governing this particular space. As I told you a little while back, the state and the city enjoy many multi-product industrial hubs. In fact, during the COVID, the chamber had a number of webinars, and it only got reinforced that the number of industrial estates in the state too would drive a lot of the growth in the housing sector in the context of migrant labor. And if we have to open up the industrial clusters in the city, I think housing is going to play a very, very important role. And the Tamil Nadu government, as many of you know, recently announced plans to build houses for nearly 1.5 lakh workers working just in the 5 industrial parks. And they want to accomplish this over the next 5 to 10 years. And knowing how some of these announcements have been made earlier and the success rate that we have seen seems a little ambitious. We are only hoping that the pandemic will catalyze some of these activities in the city. But I just wanted to share the statistic largely to drive home the point that we do have a problem waiting for solutions to be found. And in some respects, I think we need this to be accelerated. So with those few opening thoughts, let me thank you once again for the opportunity and welcome you to this events discussion. We have a galaxy of speakers, and let me shut up there and then turn it over to Saraswati.
Thanks, Ram. You have justified the reason we chose this topic in a floor setting had been done. Let me now invite Christina Clare, Program Management Officer and Officer in charge of Advocacy and Campaign Unit, External Relations, Strategy, Knowledge and Innovation Division of UN Habitat. And she has more than 25 years at the international and national levels in many urban areas. And just before the start of the program, she was also making a very interesting comment about her PhD on Chennai, on housing. So what other reason we should have to invite her here, apart from she representing UN Habitat? Christine, please.
Thank you, Saraswati. Thank you very much, Mr. Ramjuka Juma, for organizing this. I'm very happy. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. I feel really honored to join you today in this campus on housing for all. Of course, I've worked in Chennai when I was a student. I did my PhD in Chennai, so it's a very interesting coincidence. And so I'm delighted to be with you today after something like almost 30 years. That's very far away. It was in the 90s, early 90s. So this campus is part of the dedicated second Urban Thinkers Campus series on the COVID-19 crisis. It is an initiative of the World Urban Campaign. As you know, it's a convening of 200 partner organizations coming together to promote the urban agenda. I'm very happy that Chennai is part of this campaign. And this is also an activity of the UN Habitat corporate COVID-19 campaign that is meant to give a voice to all those engaged in the response to the pandemic. Is called Take Action for Cities. The hashtag, if you want to use it, hashtag Take Action for Cities, if you wanted to use that during the campus. And then we have organized Urban Thinkers campuses since 2015. And so far, more than 160 UTCs in the world, with engaging almost 50,000 people. So it has been a massive engagement to the new urban agenda and to what we call the city we need, that has been defined by the World Urban Campaign. And we thought that it would be very important to react to the COVID-19 crisis. And we started immediately, it was end of April. And we had the first series of 9 Urban Thinkers campuses. And one of them was on the shelter gaps. Yeah, we called it, we addressed all the gaps. Initially, we said we need to look at the gaps, water and sanitation, safety, wages, so all those gaps, and how we are going to address those. So we had a series of 9 campuses in the month of May, engaging more than 1,200 people, very interesting, to present actions, to give a voice to different organizations and, you know, even community-based, the mayors, planners, and to analyze the good practices, the solutions, and extract lessons from the crisis and prepare a list of recommendations. We are still, I mean, we are not responding properly to the crisis yet. We are still looking for the right solutions everywhere in the world. It's not an easy, and we don't have solutions right now to everything. We are just, you know, doing one step at a time, you know. So, but those recommendations are very interesting, and there is a report. And I'm going to just go through the key recommendations that were made in that campus on the shelter gaps on housing, because I think this is really your subject. But starting by saying that COVID has affected the life of several million people, especially those who don't have a house at the moment. The 1 billion people in need of adequate housing in the world, and about 2.2 billion people who don't have improved water and sanitation. So I think this is the first fact. And the main thing we said is a safe and secure home is the first line of defense in the pandemic. So we have realized how important it is to have a home, the importance of shelter, the importance of addressing informal housing, and the crisis has just exacerbated pre-existing conditions. So they were already there, and there were unforeseen impacts on food, education, medical service, access, domestic violence, evictions. So a lot of impact that were not expected, that were exacerbated at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, and they are still there. Yeah. So this means for those 1 billion people who don't have an adequate house, to live in fear because they can be evicted, because maybe they can't pay their rent, maybe they don't have water, they don't have sanitation as well. So I think for this population, we need to look at that, and we need to reflect on this COVID-19 crisis, to go back to elementary concept of social housing, providing home for the homeless, basic things that we have not done in the last 40, 50 years in many countries. Yeah. So the immediate action in the COVID-19 crisis has been to provide emergency accommodation in some countries to those who don't have secure housing, to look at homelessness. And in some countries, there was an immediate response, but it's not easy. We are all struggling. Put in place emergency hand washing facilities in key locations in slums. Informal settlements have been really affected, and refugee camps as well. Another immediate was to suspend relocation and eviction during the crisis, if possible. Try to enforce deferral of payment of rents and mortgages to provide relief to those affected by the crisis. It has been put in place in some countries, but in many countries, we are talking about informal settlements. So how to enforce something in informal settlement is a big question. Medium to longer term. So we need to look at the long term, as I said, to look at public sector, public-private partnership to address shortage of adequate housing for the medium term and long term, by promoting new policies and to reflect on current policies, housing policies that encourage inclusive housing development, and recognizing housing as not just a roof, but also a human right. Because as we said before, the house is the first line of defense in a pandemic like that. Yeah. And consider alternative ways to increase social housing stock, seeing housing as a shared responsibility, not just the responsibility of the local national government. And in the case of India is the state, but also the private sector. And then we are here with the Madras Chamber of Commerce. So I'm sure this is basically the core of the conversation today. Look at how we can work together, bringing the private and the public sector. Also set in place some relief programs that don't simply postpone eviction to the aftermath of the pandemic, but explore solving homelessness in a longer term strategy as well. Homelessness has been a very heavy subject in India. It's still there. How do we address it and reflect on it now? And consider housing rather than a commodity only, a human right now. I just said it before. Revisit regulatory environment with government to promote physical improvement of safe construction, because we are not going to build everything, but we can also refurbish, restore, expand also the affordability aspect through housing finance options. In fact, I knew a lot about that in the 90s in India, because under Rajiv Gandhi, there were a lot of new schemes for the middle class, the low income, EWS as well, to help the private sector to build more housing. So these are the many subjects that are very serious, difficult subjects in many countries, and I think in India and in Chennai, this is something that we really need to reflect on. Tenure security of tenure is a very big subject as well. But I think what the spirit of this COVID-19 crisis is to reflect on everything and to rethink partnerships, how partners can work together in a better way, and ensure that we don't return to business as usual soon. We really look at the issues now. It is an opportunity to reflect on inequalities, to reflect on housing shortages and slums, in the middle of this crisis. So I think that's what I would say. Try to really think now, and not assume that in a few months we'll go back to normal and things will be solved, because there will be another pandemic. Pandemics is not only COVID. There have been a lot of other disease in the world, and they can come back. So we need to be ready. So thank you all. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation, and I believe it's just the beginning of something more serious. For the World Urban Campaign, we see that under the decade of action of the United Nations. As you know, in 2030, we need to deliver the SDGs. So we have 10 years to go to deliver. SDG 11 is about cities and communities, better cities. And to me, this is part of the whole package. We are starting something. We have 10 years to deliver the SDGs, and we need to really deliver this ambitious promise. And the COVID is a signal that we really need to be ambitious and to address the real issues now, and seriously. Okay, thank you all, and all the best for this UTC. Thanks. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Christine. That's wonderful. And we would welcome you back to Chennai. Definitely not now, don't worry. Maybe post-COVID, after a few months, before probably the next pandemic starts. Please join us sometime. But that's a very good takeaway. Yes, we will have to really decide on action plans and probably bring the public-private partnership more together. Thanks a lot. Probably we will share with you the takeaways from this seminar, and we will continue to work with you. Thank you very much. We will now move on to the next speaker. The session from now on would be, we have Dr. Rao, Professor Rao, who is the Director, School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. He would be addressing now. And then we have to have Mr. Krishnan, but unfortunately, the Additional Chief Secretary, who also, we requested him to tell about the recent schemes which Mr. Ramkumar mentioned. But he has some important meeting with the Chief Minister. So we hope he may join a little later. Hopefully, we have requested him to come whenever that meeting gets over. But in the meantime, we will proceed with Dr. Rao, and then we will have 2 case studies to share some best practices from other places. We have Ms. Diana from Northern Ireland and Mr. Michela Cow from Brussels and Vienna. So then we will have a panel discussion. The Q&A session would be open after that, along with Mr. Rao also joining the panel. And in the meantime, you can please post your questions in the Q&A. We already start seeing some questions, but please use the Q&A and not the chat box for posting your question. Thank you so much. Let me now introduce Dr. Rao very, very briefly in the interest of time. He is a C-suite educationist, researcher, and consultant. He has over 32 years of experience, and he's currently Director, School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. He's trained as architect, engineer, urban planner, and a variety of areas concerning the urban development. His areas of work particularly include housing and urban affairs, architecture, urban planning, real estate, water and sanitation. He has registered with the Council of Architecture and holds a professional membership of AIA, FITP, FIE. Over to you, Professor Rao.
Thank you, Saraswati ji. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a presentation. Let me share my screen. Is it visible?
Yes, Professor, it is.
Okay. Thank you. So for everyone from across the globe, I'm going to talk about affordable housing issues and concerns. I'll be talking mostly in the context of how things have evolved over a period of time in India, and some of these perhaps are also applicable to what's happening in other parts of the world. So how do I go to the next slide?
Just move.
Yeah, it's not.
Enter, sir. Enter.
Okay, okay, I do an enter.
Yeah, enter.
Yeah,
Oh.
even enter is,
Okay, like I'll start
Down.
screen. Sir.
Page down. I think he has to press page down.
I go to page down.
Yes, sir. We did see you moving across, right? When we checked.
Yeah, but the thing is page down is not.
Maybe Madhumati, you can share it.
Yeah,
from
we
your,
can. We'll
system.
share, sir. I'll ask for that. We'll share,
Just
sir.
give us 1 second, we will share it from our end.
But you can share. Right.
Good that we have it with us.
One thing that we learned in the COVID situation is to have a backup for everything.
Yeah.
You could able to
You
see
have
the
to-
screen, sir?
No. I think you have to double
it's
click,
not opened
Swarna. Just double click again.
Our apologies to the participants in the meanwhile. Is there an issue still?
It's visible.
No, we're not able to.
no,
You've
not
got to
visible.
double click, Swarna. Yeah. Swarna? We're not
Don't,
able to-
ma'am.
No, we're not able to. Just do it, yeah.
Yeah,
Now it's
You've
visible.
gone to the 4th slide or something. Just go.
Yeah, if you can kindly go back. But
Yeah,
then
that's right. Fine, fine. We can see Swarna. Fine.
yeah, so who has the control now?
You can just say next, Miss Swarna will be able to do it. You cannot have the control because she'll be operating it from her end.
Okay, okay, fine. So we can move to the next slide. Okay, fine. So you know, the way in which our demography in India is structured, the first pyramid here talks about the population structure. We have a small number of people who are at the top of the pyramid, the well-to-do population, and we have a very large number of people who are at the bottom of the pyramid. And obviously, the large number of people at the bottom of the pyramid have an affordability which is very low, and we have a very small number of people who have an affordability which is really very high. So unfortunately, the market has been responding to the requirements of the people who have the higher affordability, which is actually a small percentage of the population. And therefore, we have a very large housing supply, a very large supply of housing, which is very expensive. And we have minimal housing supply, which is meant for the low income population. So as a result, we have a very peculiar kind of a situation in our country. And that is, while theoretically we do have something called a housing shortage, which runs into millions, we also have a very large number of vacant houses. And 2011 census has given the vacant housing numbers in India are also in millions. So that's the irony, that we have vacant houses on the one hand and we have housing shortage on the other. That's because what we are producing in the market, the supply is not matching the demand. The numbers are there, but then there's no affordability. Next one, please. So therefore, we are stuck up in what I would like to refer to as a vicious cycle of low-income housing, because the people who are in the low incomes, they have very few formal housing options, and in the absence of any access to formal credit, because when you look at the housing finance institutions in this country, they address by and large only the formal sector, because you need to have so many formal documents, you need to have a regular income supply and so on, and only then you get access to loans. So therefore, in the absence of access to formal credit and in the absence of adequate options, the only way out is for people to go into illegal occupations, subdivision of land in an illegal manner, unauthorized settlements, and so on and so forth, or they get access to high-priced informal loans and then again get into a debt, and therefore they continue to be in this vicious cycle of low incomes. So therefore, this is something. Now, how do you get out of this? The solution to this doesn't really lie only in the housing sector, because this is something to do with the socioeconomics of the country. So therefore, both these are interrelated with each other. Next one. So if you look at the state of housing provision in this country, there are various policies. We do have something called the National Housing and Habitat Policy. The first time this policy came about in the year 1987, and subsequently it has been revised a couple of times. And the latest is what is called the National Housing and Habitat Policy. So there are various state governments in our country. Housing is a state subject, and we are a very large country. We have several states, and different states have different housing policies, and different policies for creating townships, for creating public-private partnerships, and so on and so forth. Now, since I've been with the School of Planning and Architecture, I've been teaching. I've been the head of the Department of Housing. So I've had an opportunity to look at each of these documents in very great detail, and I'll not get into those details at the moment because we have limited time. Again, you will find that in all these cases, what the state promotes is maybe a 10% reservation for the economically weaker section, or maybe a 15% reservation for the low-income population, and so on. So it is again the inverted pyramid diagram that I showed you right in the beginning. Even our reservations in the housing production as a part of the formal supply is actually very distorted and totally inverse to what the situation is. Next one. When we talk about affordable housing, we would, I mean, for different people, affordability is different things. So at a very simple or simplistic level, we talk about affordability is the ability and willingness to pay for housing. So there are various factors which go into the affordability of housing. Next one. Well, there are different definitions which have been given at different points in time. This was the definition given by the Affordable Housing Task Force way back in the year 2008. Next one. Well, these are the various factors that go into deciding the affordability of a family. I'll not spend much time on this. Next one. Next one, please. Yeah. So when you look at the affordability of a person in terms of the monthly income, and then when you look at the housing price, you will come up with a diagram which is something like this. How much is the equated monthly installment which a person is in a position to pay every month? Next one. So for most real estate developers across the country, you're looking at a range which is about maybe 3 to 4 lakhs, going up to about 20 lakhs. This is the range in which we are looking at housing, which we are all popularly referring to as affordable housing. Anything which is affordable housing or housing for all falls in this range of about 3 lakhs going up to about 20 lakhs, wherein we talk about EWS and low income housing. Next one, please. Yeah, so there is an income categorization, because when you actually get to the brass tacks on the ground, you need to look at what are the incomes which people get, and then you need to categorize. Next one. This was in the year 2006, 2007. Then subsequently in the year 2010, these income brackets have changed, and they've changed once again. You can see in the next slide. 2015 onwards, this is the kind of an income range that we are looking at. Incomes of people have no doubt increased over a period of time, but then the price of housing is also increased. Next one. Yeah. So what are the barriers? Why are we not able to provide housing in this particular range? The reason for this is, if you look at the way in which housing has evolved in our country, in the initial few decades, there have been provisions made in various 5-year plans, and there were various state housing agencies like the state housing boards, the slum clearance boards, and the development authorities, cooperative societies. All these were encouraged to provide housing on a large scale. Land acquisition was also happening on a large scale, and many of the popular residential areas in most of our Indian cities that you find today, they were actually developed during that period of time. Subsequently, all that changed, and we've now given ourselves to the private sector, to the industry, mostly operated by individual real estate players. And they are unfortunately not in a position to provide housing for the low income population or the middle income population. And they are by and large catering only to the upper income population. Can we see the next slide? So again, over a period of time, what has happened is that the cost of capital itself has increased substantially. There are various financial barriers. Today, we have a highly regulated housing finance regime in the country. Way back in the year 1970, the Housing and Urban Development Corporation was established. Subsequently, in the year 1988, the National Housing Bank has got established. Today, we are fortunate enough that a very large number of commercial banks have actually entered into the housing finance sector, and you do have loans for the asking. But then again, these are catering mostly to the formal sector. So a very large number of people who need affordable housing are working in the informal sector, and except for one or two institutions, the majority of them don't really cater to them. So therefore, EMIs are either unaffordable or EMIs, you're not actually eligible for these EMIs. So there are financial barriers. Next one. There are technology or technical barriers. Over a period of time, the land values in our urban areas, particularly the large cities, have increased enormously. So high land costs have become a major barrier in the developers' ability to provide housing for the low-income population. Then we also have restrictive town planning norms, FARs, densities, height restrictions, and so on. Many of these, which came into our country thanks to the British town planning laws, these have not really got transformed to the requirements of the day. So therefore, we do find that we are unable to really go the Hong Kong way or the Singapore way, and then we find it really very difficult to provide affordable housing. Technology, of course, the way in which houses are built, this again, only in the very recent past that we are breaking some ground, but otherwise we still continue to use the traditional technology of building. So that is yet another barrier. Next slide, please. So while this being the case, today, most of the state governments have recognized the importance of affordable housing. The government of India has also recognized the importance of affordable housing. Various state governments have not only a state housing policy, they also have a document which is called affordable housing policy. And many of these state governments are actually now giving various kinds of incentives and trying to encourage the real estate developers to start down marketing their products and to start developing various affordable housing projects. If you look at the country as a whole, we have about 35 to 40 odd affordable housing projects at various stages of completion. And you do find that you can get apartments today which are of small size and reasonably priced, so that one is able to access these at an affordable price. Next one. As far as the government itself is concerned, the government is also a major producer of housing, as I said, and there are various government programs. Over the years, the last major program that we have seen was the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, which ran for about 10 years during the previous Congress regime. Under that, we had the basic services for the urban poor and so on. We had various programs for slum improvement. We have the Rajiv Awas Yojana, slum free city plan, and so on. So for 10 years of the recent Congress regime, we had a variety of these programs. I must make a mention here before going forward that over the last 6 or 7 decades, we've also had a lot of international funding. And since this program is being organized by the Madras Chamber of Commerce, I must make a mention about the enormous amount of support which the World Bank had given. Initially, we had what was called the Madras Urban Development Program, MUDP. Then subsequently, that was extended to other parts of Tamil Nadu. So you have the Tamil Nadu Urban Development Project, TNUDP, and a lot of work in the urban sector not just for housing, but also improving municipal finances, property tax administration, and so on and so forth. World Bank funding had in a very big way got implemented in various parts of Tamil Nadu. So you have this very popular sites and services schemes and slum improvement schemes happening in Chennai and other places. But of late, what is being talked about is the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, or the PMAY Housing for All. This has already seen 5 years of the Modi government, and the Modi government continues in the second 5 years as well. Modi 2.0 as they call it. So the PMAY also continues. I will talk more about the PMAY in the subsequent slides. Next one. Yeah, rental housing is another area which is extremely important, which unfortunately we've not really done much in our country. Again, rental housing. I was a member of the rental housing task force of the central government, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So I can say something more about this. Model rent legislation has been enacted because again, this is a state subject. So various states have rent control laws, and with these rent control laws, there have been several issues. Quite a few of these have actually got amended in the recent past. But unlike in the UK, where you had council housing for a long time, which was essentially rental housing for the general public, or in Singapore or in Hong Kong, for instance, I'm talking about South Asian experiences. The state builds housing stock and gives it on rent to people who cannot afford. That kind of a system, unfortunately, in our country is not present. Very recently, our Honorable Sitaraman Madam, has Finance Minister, has announced. I think there's one of the slides where I will talk about that. But I think this is one area where we can move forward. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So when you look at costs involved in housing, there's a cost of land, cost of finance, cost of infrastructure, cost of housing units, and there are other costs. When you look at housing as a product to be supplied and to be afforded by people, housing is not just a product. Housing, at least in India, is more of a process than a product. And housing is not just a house. Quite often, we look at housing as a house. So if I'm able to produce so many number of dwelling units, then I might have only numerically met the housing shortage in the country. As many households there are in this country, if there are so many dwelling units, we would theoretically think that we've solved the housing problem. But that is not the case. As we've already seen, there are a very large number of dwelling units which are unoccupied, which are unsold, which are unfinished. So therefore, housing has more to it than what meets the eye, because you may have a house, but if you don't have water, if you don't have transportation, if you don't have a school nearby where your child can go to, then nobody's going to buy it, nobody's going to occupy it. Even if you give it on rent, nobody's going to come. So therefore, it's a much more complex problem where beyond the supplier, there are many other stakeholders who have to play a role. And unless and until all of them play a role together in a coordinated manner, housing will not succeed. We'll go to the next slide. Yeah, so this will probably explain land cost, other costs, and total cost. So land is the major bulk of the expenditure that goes into making housing is actually land. Next one. So how do we make housing more affordable? I mean, given the situation as it is in this country, how do we get the maximum out of land? Because we have more or less an open market kind of a situation. How do you make housing more affordable? How do you make land more affordable? Unlike, again, I'll go back to Singapore, where the land costs are not taken into account because land is given free of charge by the government. Unlike in our country, even when you acquire land, and we've had our 1896 Land Acquisition Act amended, and we now have the LAR legislation where the market rate of compensation that you have to give to the agricultural landlords is substantial. In addition to that compensation, which is a monetary compensation, which has to be at a market rate, in addition to that, you also have to give other compensation. So today, if you ask a Tamil Nadu Housing Board or a Chennai Metropolitan Development Authority or anybody like that, a public housing provider, to acquire land from the farmers and provide extensions, layouts, whatever, it is going to be a very, very expensive proposition. So how do you do a cross subsidy and how do you make things more affordable? So it's a very, very difficult exercise. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, so these are all the various methods by which housing is supplied in our country. In different parts of the country, in different states, there are different ways in which we have been providing housing. One of the methods that was very popular at one time but fell out of fashion in the recent past has now again become popular. That is the town planning schemes, wherein you pool land of the people without acquiring, and then after doing some readjustment, you again give back the land to the people. This is a rather difficult task where the government has to do a lot of work, but then this is most acceptable to the people, and this is one method by which you can actually provide a lot of housing without really acquiring land. But unfortunately, state governments are fighting shy. The government of Chhattisgarh tried this in a very big way, and they ended in several problems. Provisions are there in various states, but unfortunately they are not implementing. Gujarat is perhaps the only state where these land pooling schemes are being implemented in a very big way. Cooperative societies can do a lot of work. People can come together on their own, form cooperative societies, develop housing on their own. I think Tamil Nadu is doing a fairly good job. Unfortunately, Karnataka had some issues and they've almost stopped. Delhi had a lot of cooperative societies at one time, but currently nothing much is being done. That's again another unexplored area where you can actually increase the supply of housing. Real estate developers, of course, they are there all over the place, but then they have their own limitations because they are operating as a private profiteering company. So they have very limited, but then today incentives are being given to them, saying that if you do green housing, if you do affordable housing, then we'll give you certain incentives of an additional FAR and so on. So developers are also trying to chip in. I must mention the example of Rajasthan here, because Rajasthan has as many as 5 different options for producing affordable housing, where they're giving concessions in terms of stamp duty reductions, property tax reductions, and so on and so forth. So that's a model that can be emulated. But having said all this, we still find that there are a large number of people who are squatting. You may call them by different names: Zopadpattis in Mumbai, Jhuggi Jhopdis in the north, Bastis in maybe Kanpur or Rajasthan or wherever. So I think in Tamil Nadu they're called sheris, or in Kerala. So these shanties are still there. So that's an area that requires a lot of addressal at the moment. Next slide. Yeah, basically this is a more detailed description of this, but I think we don't have time to get into this, so we'll just move forward. Yeah, as I said, land acquisition is a very tough choice for us to make now. So therefore, we need to go into more for pooling, readjustment, public-private partnerships, and other methods. Land redevelopment is also happening in a very big way these days. Next slide, please. There are many places in our country now where we are pulling down the old housing, which is of a very low density, and we are trying to put in a higher density, higher rise housing, so that we are able to get more of the limited land that's available. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there are housing is an area where you have a conflict of several interests. The politician has a different perspective. He wants to play obviously to the gallery. He wants to play to the low income population, but then he has serious limitations in terms of finances that are available. Environmental lobby is a very big lobby today, and you will find that a large number of redevelopment projects today have got stuck up on account of the tree cutting issue and various other environmental clearances that are there. So and large scale land acquisition, again, farmer agitations have come into play in a very big way. So today housing is becoming a much more complicated challenge than what it was in the earlier days. Next slide, please. Yeah, So it is a major dilemma. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. Now how do we fund? Today, if you go to any housing finance institution in this country, there are about 20 odd registered housing finance institutions in our country. They don't provide funding for land. They will only provide you funding for an apartment. So therefore, who's going to fund the land? Which means that you already have to have a certain amount of money before you can really go forward. So it's a very serious challenge. And how do you do this? HUDCO at one time was providing the funding for the land. Unfortunately, a very large number of even government undertakings had been defaulting the loans of HUDCO, and they had to be blacklisted. So therefore, today, this is a very serious issue. Next slide, please. Yeah, as I said, we are not really utilizing land to the fullest extent possible. So all these have to change. Low FARs have to change, height restrictions have to change, densities have to be increased, restrictive zoning has to change. This is all happening partly, I must say. I can quote a number of examples where this is happening. And this will probably, this should continue for a long time to come before we can achieve the closure of the housing shortage. Next slide, please. Yeah, there are innovations in various parts of the country, where, for instance, in the creation of Navi Mumbai, or even beyond Navi Mumbai, now there are many projects that are happening where land has been acquired for the new airport in Mumbai, Navi Mumbai. There's a new airport that's coming up. Huge chunks of land have been acquired. So there are various schemes where pooling is happening, and then the agricultural landlords from whom the land has been taken away, they're being returned back some amount of land, and this kind of a pooling is trying to bring in urban development at a reasonable price with very little restrictions coming in. Innovations in Rajasthan, I already mentioned. Reservations in various public-private partnerships, reservations are being made compulsory, so that when the developer makes housing, he provides a certain amount of housing for the economically weaker section or for the low-income population. Next slide, please. Yeah, so therefore, there are various imperatives. We need to do all of these, and this is a long list of things which are actually being attempted at various levels. In various states, we are doing these, and because of these, the things are improving. I will come to the last bullet point here, fast approval process. There is something called ease of doing business that the government of India is today talking about. There are as many as 7 different ministries across the central government which are working on improving India's ranking on ease of doing business. And under ease of doing business, there are various categories. Building plan approval processes is one of those categories where there is a lot of work to be done in order to improve this. So a lot of computerization is happening. Initially, Delhi and Mumbai have been chosen, and I think now this exercise is going to get to other cities as well, so that the approval processes can be increased. Real estate developers can see their approvals coming through single window and so on and so forth at a quicker rate, so that the litigation can be reduced, time lost can be reduced, and therefore you can actually reduce the other costs that all add on ultimately to the total price at the end of the day. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, these are some pictures of some affordable housing projects in Bangalore, if I am not mistaken. We can keep skipping these pictures. Yeah, you can skip these. Okay, there is also a need for validation of affordable housing projects. There is also some kind of a thinking amongst many people, why is it that the nano project in India really failed? Because Indian society today is in an aspirational stage, and today even the person who cannot afford much, it's okay, he cannot afford much, but then he also has some status in the society, and he doesn't want to be seen purchasing something which is a very cheap product, because affordable is considered to be bad quality by many people, unfortunately, which is probably not always the case. So therefore, many people didn't want to buy although they could not afford, they didn't want to buy the nano car because people thought that if I'm seen with a nano car, then people will think that I'm a poor fellow. So that's the kind of a situation we have.
Dr.
There is
Rao, we are running a little short on time. So if you could-
I'm closing. So can we move to the next slide? Yeah, this is the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, where different there are four different ways in which the current government is trying to look at housing here, and not all these are successful, but the fourth vertical, the beneficiary-led housing, this is really very successful. And maybe when somebody asks for more details, I can give these. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, these are all the details of the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. So I think we can keep moving forward. In case anybody wants more information in the panel discussion, I'll go into these. Yeah, there are some credit-linked subsidies which are also being given as an incentive so that this affordable housing can come in. Yes, move forward, please. Yeah, affordable housing in partnerships. Unfortunately, this is not really taking off as much as we thought it would. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, this is very important because the government of India has taken a major challenge in order to bring in alternative technologies, totally innovative technologies, green buildings, earthquake resistant buildings, and so on and so forth, because we have to move away from the conventional way in which we are building so that we are able to provide housing at a much faster pace and also provide housing which is more sustainable, which is more green. So this technology submission is also happening in a very big way. I'll speak more about it in case we have time at a later point. Can we move forward? Yeah, so these are all the sanctioning processes and so on, the ease of approval system, single window clearance and so on, which I had mentioned earlier. Okay, we can move. We'll just go to the, further. Yes, I think this is the last slide. I will conclude here. Very recently, in this month itself, because of the COVID-19 situation, we've seen this issue with the migrants not having anywhere to go and running back to their villages and so on. So the government has made an allocation of about 600 crores, and there's a two-pronged approach of providing affordable rental housing for the low-income population, wherein they're saying that existing vacant government housing complexes can be converted into affordable rental housing complexes, where a concession agreement would be made out for a period of 25 years so that the existing stock can be used for the migrants. And number two is that special incentives can also be given, use permissions can be given and so on and so forth with concessional lending rates, so that developers can come in and they can also build these affordable rental housing units. So in the area of rental housing also some movement we are seeing. This is the latest development in the housing sector, so I thought I'll mention this as well. So I think this is the last slide. We can stop here. It has been very nice. Thank you for giving me a patient hearing, and I am around, and in case we need some clarifications, then we can take them up at a later date. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Rao. Thanks for that excellent presentation, giving an overview of what affordable housing means in India. We will now go to the global experience. We have two interesting case studies. In the interest of time, I'll quickly move to Ms. Diana Fitzsimons. She is a town planner and development surveyor council member of Ireland. She is she is also part of the International Federation of Housing and Planning, IFHP Council of Ireland. Professor Diana has had a career in town planning in the public, private, and academic sectors in the UK, specializing in planning for urban regeneration and property development. She is a fellow of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors and a fellow of the Royal Town Planning Institute, and holds a master's degree in economics and political science, and also in town planning. Her current activities include chairing Radius Housing, the largest housing association in Northern Ireland, and being a Belfast Harbour Commissioner. Welcome you, Diana, to present a case study of what you are doing there in Belfast.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll put my presentation on now.
You want to share, or you want my people to help?
You can do it for me, okay?
Okay, Sverna, please.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to take part in this Urban Thinkers Campus. My intention is to give you a little insight into how we clarify that the term affordable housing in the UK includes social rented housing as well as co-ownership housing, which is part buy, part rent, and also low-priced housing, often sold below market value. So my next slide, please. Just a little bit of background on Northern Ireland. It's a tiny place compared to your beautiful country, and even tiny compared to your lovely city of Chennai. We have only a population of 1.9 million and a land area of 14,000 square kilometres. We are what's called a devolved nation within the UK, and so we have our own parliament. Many of our laws are similar to those of England, but sometimes slightly different. Belfast and Londonderry are the main cities, and the rest of Northern Ireland has a range of very small and medium-sized settlements, with a lot of people choosing to live in owner-occupied single dwellings in the countryside, which isn't very sustainable. Average earnings are about £28,000 per annum, which you must multiply by 100 to get rupees, with an unemployment rate of about 2.3%, which sounds better than it is due to the increasing number of the population, which is over 65 years old, and those who are not seeking to work due to disability or for other reasons. We have a good educational system with 80% of school leavers going on to further education or university, and life expectancy is between 79 years and 82 years for men and women, respectively. In a recent survey, the number of people identifying as unionist, in other words, wanting to stay as part of the United Kingdom, was 26%, and the number of people identifying as nationalist, in other words, wanting a united Ireland, was 21%, with a big increase in those identifying as neither unionist or nationalist. These are young people coming up through the system and not really having those sort of political interests. Next slide, please. I'm from Radius Housing, and I'm chair of the board. And in terms of housing in Northern Ireland, there are something like 8,000 new homes built every year in Northern Ireland, of which about 2,000 of those are built by the top 4 housing associations. And there are something like 40,000 applicants for social housing on a central government waiting list. But these are not all people in housing stress. These are people who would like to move or within social housing or would like to get a social house. The selection criteria in Northern Ireland is very strict, so that those most in need of a house go to the top of the waiting list. And this is judged on a range of criteria, including current housing conditions, insecurity of tenure, their health and well-being criteria, and something called intimidation. Radius Housing has 1,000 staff, a turnover of 90 million per annum. It borrows about 200 million, and it has an asset value of about 900 million. We recently borrowed 105 million in the United States on the bond market at very low interest rates. So we are regarded as a very stable association to be invested in. We manage 13,000 homes, which probably seems very little in an Indian context, but it's quite big for Northern Ireland. We have 130 sheltered housing schemes for the elderly, for people who want to live independently but live in a group. We have a number of housing with care facilities for those who are frail or have dementia and need some medical care. And we have a variety of facilities for very vulnerable groups, such as people coming out of prison, people who are suffering from alcoholism, and people who are homeless, those kind of vulnerable groups. And in those, we work with partners, other charities who run the facilities, but we assist them and also provide the buildings and the maintenance. We also provide floating support service for people who want to remain living in their own homes, mainly the elderly. We go around to their homes and help them with cleaning or shopping, or give them some social life outside of the home. And in addition, we have 22,000 telecare customers. We have a system whereby people sign up for telecare. They have technology in their own home, assistive technology, and we are able to monitor their health and well-being through a 24-hour call center where we have experts who can point them in the right direction if they're not feeling well. Social housing in Northern Ireland is provided by 20 housing associations and also by a central government agency called the Housing Executive, which owns and manages 90,000 homes, but is no longer developing due to its inability to borrow private monies without impacting on the government's borrowing requirements. Unemployment and poor housing conditions were very significant issues, which led to our civil unrest in Northern Ireland in the 70s and 80s. You can go back to the pictures. Thank you. The Housing Executive was set up in the early 1970s to build social housing for people in need and to allocate housing on a fair basis, ignoring the applicant's religion or political outlook, whether they were Catholic or Protestant. Prior to that, housing powers had been with the councils, but housing powers were taken away from councils and centralised in this Northern Ireland Housing Executive. Housing associations have been in existence for 40 years, and there are now 20 in all, but really 4 big developing associations seeking to build something like 2,000 homes per year, mostly houses, but some apartments. People in Northern Ireland seem to want to live in houses with small gardens rather than living in apartments. Recently, housing associations have begun to build mixed tenure developments and have sold some private affordable housing mixed in with the social housing at below the open market value. There's also a right to buy government scheme whereby existing social housing tenants are allowed to buy the house they live in, often at a substantial discount if they have lived there a considerable time. So this right to buy scheme has also allowed existing social housing developments to become mixed tenure over time. Next slide. This slide shows that the type of buildings that we have. We build 2-story, 2 to 4 bedroom houses. Sometimes family sizes on average are 2.5 people, but sometimes we have larger family sizes and we will build a 4-bedroom house. There tend to be high to medium density houses with small gardens, as that is what is wanted by families in Northern Ireland. We build in city and town centres as well as in the suburbs, but only in areas where there's a waiting list for social housing. The process of development in this slide is not unlike that for a private developer, but we have many government checks along the way and feasibility hurdles to be overcome in order to obtain grant funding from the government of 50% of our costs of construction. We buy sites in the open market, so we often get sites that are surplus to government requirements, such as former school sites or sites where the private sector is not interested due to contamination or unfavourable ground conditions. We do feasibility studies, then get sign-off for grant support by the government. Then we buy the site, we recruit the design team, we get the proposals through to planning approval and other consents, such as sewerage and electricity supply. Then we appoint through very strict procurement laws. And finally, we get on site to carry out the development. We then build the houses and allocate them from this central government waiting list, which, as I said before, is based on need. So we must take from the top of this list, and we can't do favors to people. So it's a very open and transparent system of allocating housing. Next slide, please. We are concerned to improve the quality of social housing developments in Northern Ireland, and My Housing Association has developed a design guide for our architects and other consultants. We basically prefer mixed use and mixed tenure where feasible, plus mixed religion housing where possible. In terms of layout, we want to ensure accessibility to services by road and walking and cycling. We want safe open spaces and play areas. We want high quality sustainable homes and good quality finishes outside, along with landscaping. We want layouts designed to deter crime and antisocial behaviour. We have some way to go in terms of developing zero carbon homes, but we are doing quite well in terms of fuel poverty and making sure homes are built with sustainable materials and built with insulation in mind. Next slide, please. In addition to a good physical environment, we believe that new housing developments need support to become resilient and sustainable communities, economically, environmentally, and socially sustainable. This requires effort when we are housing people who come from the top of the waiting list based on need and may initially be suffering from low income, social, and other well-being issues. So these are people who may have come to our developments in some form of trauma. Next slide, please. As I have said, we believe that developments should be both mixed religion and mixed tenure where possible. This is important in Northern Ireland, where over many decades, working class Protestants and working class Catholics have chosen to live apart. Most existing social housing developments in Northern Ireland are totally segregated. This is not the case in middle class private housing areas where there is much greater mix and people are generally unaware or not concerned about what religion their neighbours might have. The government wants to break down this self-chosen segregation and encourage mixed religion developments in social housing. So we get extra grant funding from the government to undertake community integration work, such as shared events at our mixed religion developments. We call them T-Box schemes. We also believe in mixed tenure so that we don't develop swathes of social housing, but instead have developments where there's a mix of people who are unemployed and employed, homeowners, key workers, and renters. We believe that makes for more thriving communities. Next slide, please. We have a committed community investment team in Radius, and they carry out a whole range of activities throughout our social housing developments to ensure our tenants are engaged with us. We have a number of tenant panels and forums, and we try to get as many tenants as possible to join in and communicate with us. We help signpost our tenants into the world of work and into creative projects. We provide apprenticeships through our construction contractors who have a requirement in the contract to take on local young unemployed people. We provide classes to help people gain the skills to manage their finances themselves and use the internet. We provide classes for young mothers on caring and cooking for children. We provide classes for a range of groups to encourage a more active lifestyle, weight loss, healthier eating, mental health awareness, and so on. We also assist tenants claiming any government benefits that they didn't know they were entitled to. And during COVID, we helped with food supplies for low-income families where young children might have gone hungry without free school meals. We run events to encourage a breakdown of ethnic barriers and allow our tenants to understand their different cultural backgrounds. So we have a number of people from different origins, such as Chinese, Indian, Middle Eastern, or European. And we want our developments to be integrated and for people to feel very comfortable living in those areas. Next, please. And these are just a slide of the number of events we do with our young people. We We're not the nanny state. We don't go in and force people to be community orientated, but we provide the facilities that if people want to join in, they can join in. And very often where we have a new development, it brings people together naturally and they get to know each other and it breaks down barriers. Now, for my case study, next slide, please. Next slide, please. I am using a development of 244 houses and apartments in inner city West Belfast, close to the main motorway. The site was a car factory for many years until it closed permanently a few years ago, and it was for sale in the last financial recession. A developer had bought it and then got into difficulty, so we came in and bought the site at a fairly low value. It already had planning permission for private housing, but the owner-occupied housing adjoining the site, the people who lived there objected to us proposing to build social housing, and some politicians also objected as they believed the new tenants would vote for a different party in what was a marginal political seat. So we had a lot of work to do with our consultants to eventually get a planning permission that would be financially feasible for us to develop. Next slide, please. We agreed a mix of uses, including 6,000 square meters of employment uses in 3 blocks along the motorway, a large community building, linear and 3 other major open spaces, a number of playgrounds, 2 accesses to the site, considerable landscaping, and what we're quite proud of is mixed tenure housing, with the private housing being pepper potted throughout the social housing. So each house was what we call tenure blind. If you were driving along, you wouldn't notice which was a social house and which was owner occupied. Next slide, please. This is the layout of the mainly 2-story terraced and semi-detached houses, some 3-story. There are a few apartments as well in the corner. The motorway runs down the right-hand side of the site, and you can see that on that side of the site are the employment uses in purple and the community building in dark red. And you can see that there are a number of open spaces and a number of play areas and a linear walkway right around the inside of the site. Next slide, please. This is an illustration of one of the areas of grouped housing around an open space, and you can see it's high quality, landscaped, 2-story, some 3-story, and the 3-story houses actually have a balcony at the top with a screen, and so you can sit and sunbathe if we ever get the good weather. Next slide, please. This was an actual slide of a photograph of the site last week when I went there with the Minister for Communities. It was very muddy and very wet, and we had to wear our boots. So this is the housing under construction, and we hope to have the first tenants in the autumn. The construction has been ongoing for a year, but much of this time was work to decontaminate the site. Contamination being much worse than the consultants had predicted. There was a lot of asbestos had been shoveled under the factory building. Then the contractors had to down tools over COVID-19 and the lockdown, but started up again in May and are progressing well now. Next slide, please. I have already said that our ambition is to create communities when many new families are coming together for the first time. We have already consulted with the local population in the area and engaged with the local schools and churches and organisations such as sporting clubs. So we've spent the last year and a half consulting the local people, the existing people, trying to understand how the wider neighbourhood works that we're going to put our 244 houses into. We set up a local advisory group that meets regularly to make sure that the neighbouring people are happy with the construction work and that we address any issues that arise during construction. When we allocate houses to the future tenants, then we will work with each of them in advance of their tenancy to make sure they know about the area and what we expect of them as tenants. There are rules of tenancy. You know, we expect people to respect their home and to respect their neighbourhood. As the houses fill up, we will undertake a community audit to better understand what sort of people will form the community and develop a community plan for encouraging their participation in the community. After progressing with this plan, we will continually review our successes and failures and try to do better. So this is really a program of leading people into becoming self-sufficient and sustainable and able to have a neighborhood and a community that is resilient for the future. Next slide, people, please. We see success from such community investment being in the form of individual people's improved capacity to live happily in a community and take leading roles within that community. We believe we can support the community to eventually stand on its own feet, with tenants and homeowners glad to take on a variety of roles and most people being active in community events. We believe that the community building that we are putting on the site will be used for a variety of social and sporting activities leading to better health and well-being, and we will continue to give tenants access to our financial advisors to ensure that they can cope with the recession that is coming our way. We hope that the tenants and owners will form a cohesive and inclusive neighbourhood where people from different ethnic origins and different religions will feel understood and accepted. We will work on this with the local schools, and we particularly hope to engage with older young people who may have come from a poor educational background, and we want to encourage them to be self-confident enough to go into the world of work, because one of our problems in Northern Ireland is intergenerational unemployment, and to bolster their self-confidence. So this is the type of work we're doing in Northern Ireland. I appreciate it's not of the scale, the problem is not of the scale of India or other countries in the world that I have visited, South America, Africa, and it may look as if we have it very easy here, but we have these sectarian problems that we need to overcome. And we also we are a low income part of the United Kingdom, and we need to be very careful with how we invest our government resources. So thank you for listening to me. We haven't got it right in Northern Ireland, but our housing for lower socioeconomic groups is definitely much better than it was in the 1950s and the 1960s, and much of which caused the troubles in Northern Ireland and the civil conflict. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Diana. Good to know about the focus on the inclusivity to ensure that everyone has a place. All the very best to you. We will now quickly move on to the next case study. We will also see what's happening on the other place. We have Ms. Michela Kaut, who is with us to share her case study. I know we are running short of time, so I would request the audience to bear with us. She is the director of the Brussels Liaison Office of the City of Vienna, and she started her professional career with the city administration in 1992 as a press officer to the City Councillor for Housing and Urban Renewal, and has held several posts, including as Head of Cabinet of City Councillors for Integration, Women's Studies, Consumer Protection, Personal Well-being, Health and Social Affairs, and so on. After being appointed as Director of the Brussels office in 2009, she stepped in the arena of urban EU affairs. Since 2010, she is the official representative of the City of Vienna in the Executive Committee of Eurocities on officers level, as well as in its working group in the EU Urban Agenda. She holds a master's degree in International Public Management, and she is here with us. I'm happy to present Ms. Michela Kaut to the audience here.
Yes, thanks a lot. It's very kind that you invited me. I hope I can share now my presentation.
Would you like to do it yourself, or you want help from us?
If you can share it, I'm fine.
Swarna, can you step in?
Okay, just let me start with a brief introduction. what I'm going to talk about. I will now open up the scope for, say, a little bit broader, the European level, more specifically the area of the European Union. And next slide, please. What I will give you a little bit of an insight is that, in fact, Europe has not comparable with many places in the world. I'm quite aware of that. But Europe also has a housing crisis, which has been there since the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009. But we also have a rich and broad and dense variety of housing solutions all over Europe, in European cities, regions, and countries. And I think this is also a wealth we can gain, the security that solutions are possible, but we need to upscale them in some cases on European level. So I'm going to talk about a few things and try to be also already in response to some of the issues that have been raised by the speakers before. Especially I appreciated Professor Rao's insight into the system in India. This was partly, of course, known to me, but not in that density and in that detail. So thank you very much, Professor, for that. And what we heard from Northern Ireland and the UK is also something which is part of the European housing system. So this was more familiar to me. So let's start with the next slide, please. Just the basics. I mean, because this is a UN Habitat umbrella event, and I think we should recall that there's a list of declarations and findings on housing as a right. I think core is obviously the Sustainable Development Goals, which are part of this meeting today also, or give the background. The United Nations Geneva Charter on Sustainable Housing, I think we should mention that one. On European level, we have important declarations, such as the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, and the latest one, the youngest one, is the European Pillar of Social Rights, which has a Principle 19, which has a focus on housing and homelessness. So, but as this is also in times of Corona, and we are all used to now having these virtual conference formats, just let me recall you that what Leilani Farah said, she's the former UN Special Rapporteur on Adequate Housing. Housing is at the heart of the Corona crisis. And I think that this has been very clear all over the globe, also in European cities and regions. If the next slide, please. And we maybe looking a little bit back, today we have a housing crisis that has to do with COVID-19, but we already had a housing crisis before, as I said, in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. What we saw that is there was a steep and continuous increase in housing prices and market rents all over the EU. Housing markets as such being fragmented, distorted, and characterized by failures. And we have a growing number of EU citizens, as Diana Fitzsimmons mentioned, that cannot afford housing anymore. And this is not going for the low income class, but it has hit the middle class. Last OECD findings on the squeezed middle class in Europe says that it's really the middle class that has now problems with affordability, housing costs, and other issues. And they are, even after Corona, this has been aggravated, at risk of eviction. Next slide, please. So just to recall you, because I think what both Professor Rao mentioned, and also what Christine Auclair said, and what Diana Fitzsimmons said, if you look at housing, you have to see the housing continuum. And then you have, in this whole continuum, you have the spectrum which is dealing with affordable housing. And in this, again, we have, and it's a little bit similar to the slide I saw with Professor Rao. You have a very broad variety of solutions when it comes to social housing, affordable rental housing, and affordable home ownership. And this is something we have been focusing very much upon in the 3 years work of the housing partnership of the urban agenda for the EU. Next slide, please. Its main aim was to see that there is an investment gap of over 600 billion euro that has been accumulated since 2008 and 9. Next slide, please. And for this, you can switch this to the next slide, please. Okay. And this investment gap clearly also puts much more pressure on the available stock. So the less you have in the market, the less that is constructed new, the more the pressure will be on prices and rents all over. And this is the latest data of Eurostat, fresh from yesterday. You can see that really since 2007, there has been a very steep increase in house prices, rent costs. And at the same time, we all have to be aware of that, wages were stagnating. And with COVID-19, even there is a danger that wages or incomes are getting lower. So this is going to cause terrible problems also for European citizens, families, people. Next slide, please. Just a small side mention of that. We see that a lot of cities and regions and countries have taken a range of measures to protect their citizens from losing their homes. They've done a lot, it has been mentioned before, also to provide for more shelters for homeless people, more shelters for women who have been victims of male domestic violence, which has been sadly on the rise in times of lockdown. And we have seen maybe at least one positive development, that is that short-term touristic holiday rentals, they have been brought back to the regular housing market, which is something that should be noted also in this context. But what we can see, and I think that's important, the more diversified and the broader the affordable housing stock, remember the little slide about the housing continuum, is in a given country's region, city, the more the system has proved to be overall resilient and crisis-proof. Next slide, please. This is just a set of examples, what cities have been doing. Just next slide, please. I've been working as a coordinator of the housing partnership in the frame of the urban agenda for the EU. That has been a thematic partnership, one of 14, that has explored as how more can be done for affordable housing in the EU, on EU level, but also on national level and on local and regional level. So when we look at the nature of affordable housing, it's in fact, if you look at its characteristics, it's long-term stability for everybody that is part of the game. And that's both the tenants or homeowners, if it's owner occupied, but it's also the investors, and those can be private or public. So long-term stability, certainty, clarity is important. And what we have been seeing is that cities are or should be the facilitators in matchmaking those needs with a special focus on social cohesion. Now we know maybe not everybody in this virtual room, but the EU in itself does not have a direct mandate on housing. This is still a competence of the member states. And I, as a Viennese, I think this is good. Yeah? But EU policies and legislation, especially when you look at funding, have a clear impact on housing provision on all the government levels. And that is why the Housing Partnership has delivered an action plan that aims at deblocking the missing investment. We remember that the gap is about more than 600 billion to enable cities to provide for good housing policy for all their inhabitants. Next slide, please. Of these policy recommendations, it's a set of 13 big actions. Many deal with EU-related legal affairs. Some are funding related, some is about capacity building for a better uptake of financing and funding. A lot is in the legal field of state aid, where we need to clarify the existing legal uncertainty, and some is in the European semester to allow for more long-term public investment in social infrastructure, including housing. But that's very EU specific. Next slide, please. And that's something which is maybe even more interesting also to the broader global audience. What is really important is that when you look at housing, most of it is delivered on the local level. We've been hearing the cases of several cities now, Belfast, Chennai. Very, very happy to have learned from you on that. And I think that the exchange about those examples and about those experiences is something that is key, because nobody needs to reinvent the wheel. I know what I'm talking about because nearly everybody in the world, at least before Corona, came to Vienna and wanted to know how we do it in Vienna. Because apparently we do it since 100 years, and it seems that we are on a good track because we always have the best ranks in all the livability rankings that are done on global level. So I think we are doing something well. But exchange and better data are some issues that have been addressed as well by our housing partnership. And because they also allow for better monitoring. And I think monitoring is also something that you need to do not only on local and national level, but especially also on European Union level, as we have seen that European Union policies have an effect on the delivery of affordable housing on local level. Next slide, please. And coming to the point, I think this is really a little bit the heart piece of our work as housing partnership. And it's a little bit the toolbox for good housing policy. We have deliberately named it a toolbox because we know that housing situations differ a lot. There is a great diversity of systems, of governance, of the traditions. We've heard about the Northern Ireland example. Everybody wants to be in their own little house. Me personally, I think that this is as a city planner, a little bit difficult because it creates a lot of trouble with all the accompanying infrastructure, both on the ground and below the ground. But I have to respect that people want this, and so we have to see how we can solve it. But in full respect of the principle of subsidiarity, which is so much important on EU level, we have delivered this little toolbox. And I just go to the next slide, please. And this toolbox is naming some of the most important policy fields that can contribute to have a good housing policy in your city, in your region, mostly. And I'm just not going to go through all of these because that would be too long, but I will focus on two of them, I think. One would be, if you can just scroll through the slides now. One is on, these are very clear two recommendations to define better the housing cost overburden rate. That might be interesting also for Professor Rao, because you've been working on affordability so much. Next one, please. Renovation and energy efficiency, that's clearly in line with all the Green Deal and the climate change issue. Next slide, please. Number 4 is interesting because I think that co-ownership, co-management, and co-design in housing is something that has not been, it has been mentioned already a little bit in the previous contributions, but I think really co-creation of your neighborhood and not only your housing is something that also can contribute to better quality of life in your cities and to better ownership, taking care of things, if people have the feeling that they are part of the decision making, not only the object of the decision making. But when it comes to building ground, we are now stepping into the really interesting parts. We have been working a lot about the topic of why housing costs are so exaggerated, and part of them is obviously the building ground costs, the land costs. So there is a few things we can do on local and regional level, mainly on local city level, that is with spatial planning. So you could do things like earmarking plots for only limited periods. If the developer doesn't build in a certain period of time, it's back. It's just back to the city that owns it. You can do urban development agreements where you also oblige the developer to contribute to the infrastructure that is needed in a new development site. What we did in Vienna and what has been done in many cities already is you introduce a category subsidized housing in your zoning law. So which means that this will allow you to more easily achieve social cohesion and social mix. You could also do that by establishing quota for social housing in your urban development plans. So this is a few elements when it comes to spatial plannings that we found interesting to share. Next slide, please. Another one with regard to land use and building ground. Very often I have the impression in all the discussions that the public, the state, the city is obliged to sell off the land. No, it is not. You can have long-term lease contracts. We have a lot of them in Vienna, for instance, for 99 years, where the developer can build and do his project. But the ground stays in the ownership of the city. That means that we can, as a city, control for a very long time what's going to happen there, and we can also control the land price. If it's not sold, no speculation will be done on the basis of that, which is one of the key I would say, origins of the big financialization we have been seeing going on in our housing markets. So what you can also do is you can create limited profit entities and land development or housing funds, something we have been doing in Vienna to buy in time enough reserves for the growing city that we are. So we can now easily, for instance, a few weeks ago, our mayor declared that we are going to build 1,000 new municipal housing in addition to the 14,000 flats that are already under construction since 1.5 years. So this is something you have to provide for enough building ground, but keep it in your hands at best. You can also create a city-based land fund. This is something we've been doing. And there is interesting models like the community land trusts, which are kind of shared ownership concessions, which you can give. And as I said, leasing models as an alternative to selling. This can all be part of the control of the house, the shortage of land due to the increase of building ground costs. Next slide, please. Other part is, because it has been mentioned, is taking care of rents, stabilization and control. This is something where it's appropriate to have local comparable rent systems. Transparency is key here. Next slide, please. If the next slide is okay. And also the security of tenure is something we've been working a lot to see how this can be improved. Or tenants, organizations of owner-occupied homes, to protect them as they are the weaker part of the system, where very often this is something we've already seen in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. We've seen this now also in the Corona crisis. So the last slide, I think, is coming now. So to sum up, I think that growing cities, and we are talking about growing cities in this context, I would say very much, we need a concise, diverse, and holistic, inclusive housing system first. And the overall goal has to, and as has been said very often, to provide for adequate and affordable housing. In a second step, you need to secure land in a long-term perspective. That means that your urban development plan needs to be integrated and able to account for multiple challenges. We have seen this aspect of social and territorial segregation, gentrification, financialization, climate change, etc. I think that community participation, community-led urban developments, and stakeholder involvement are key for a good and integrated urban development plan. Vienna, for instance, just to give you an example, our smart city strategy, which we had since long, has now been topped up by this sustainable development goals. So we have really included them into our smart city strategy. And I think, and this in a very open and participatory and transparent process. And I think this has really provided for a very good quality in the result. When it comes to such a plan, if you have it, if you have the development plan, if you have such a housing scheme, it will be very, very important to build a transparent and accountable governance system around it. And that also has to include the investment part of things. Because when it comes to housing finances, and we had the examples from India, it's not any investor that we want when it comes to affordable housing. It's the one that are in line with the long-term nature of affordable housing schemes. So look, it's a very, very, someone has mentioned it also in the chat, going back to the housing bubble of the 2008-2009 global financial crisis. Indeed, if you are going for 3 years profit margins in Vienna as a real estate developer, you will not find a lot of friends. We are looking for partners from the private sector, obviously, but which are partners in long-term housing projects. And then we are talking about lifetimes of 50 years and more of buildings. So that's about the long-term nature of affordable housing that I mean, because after all, housing should be a home for a family that grows, that gets older, that develops their lives, that needs to take all the chances that are there in life. And that means that we are talking about a lifetime home. And I think that is something that I've been seeing in a lot of discussions, especially when we are looking in the differences between Eastern and Western Europe. There is such a rich variety of housing solutions. There is much more than just I would say that there's more than rental and home ownership. Remind everybody, and I think it has been mentioned also in the presentation of Professor A, we have a rich resource in the cooperative sector. And I think cooperative sectors, which are also community-led and participatory, can be a solution for the problems we are facing also in the cities that are growing so much on global scale. There is the third sector, which is not for profit or for very limited profit, but it has to have strong partners and reliable partners, both from the investment side and also from the public side. And I think if you have any more questions, next slide, please. Feel free to read the action plan of the Urban Agenda Housing Partnership. We have a lot of annexes with studies, briefings, analysis, etc. And you can also contact me directly at my office in Brussels. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michela, for that excellent presentation. You have made it very clear that we cannot afford to have a short-term approach for affordable housing. It has to be a lifetime thing, and probably the private sector investment interest and involvement is critical. Thank you so very much for joining us at such short notice and making an excellent presentation. We will quickly move on to the last part of the program. I know we have overshot that time much beyond what we planned, but I'll now leave it to Mr. Shivaraman, who is also the past president of the Madras Chamber, to just take over and then moderate the panel discussion. He was also the founding person of our Sustainable Chennai Forum, and he is the managing director and CEO of Shriram EPC Limited. We have two excellent panelists, Mr. Prakash Challa, the chairman and managing director of SSPDL Group, formerly Srinivasa Shipping and Property Development Limited, who had been in the property development since July 1993 and in various centers in Chennai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, and so on. And he was also the past president of CREDAI, the Confederation of Real Estate Developer Association of India, National, and he's the chairman of the National Advisory Council of CREDAI, New Delhi at present. And we have with us Mr. Rajiv Nehru, Director Product Development Training and RIC School of Built Environment, Noida. He heads the Training and Product Development Division at RICS South Asia. He's a civil engineer with a master's in construction management from the University of Pune. He also holds a diploma in materials management. He has more than 23 years of experience as a construction management professional. And I understand he has trained more than 15,000 people in construction project management. Over to you, Mr. Shivaraman.
Thank you, Saraswati. I think in the interest of time, I will cut short my any introductory remarks that I had. Basically, I would like to say that we have been talking about in independent India for more than 70 years about affordable housing. And I think it's become an oxymoron that if it's affordable, it's not housing, and if it's housing, it's not affordable. So we need to kind of figure out where we go from here. The other point that I wanted to make, which probably would kind of bring up my first question to the panelists, is do we need to fundamentally change the way we are looking at housing in India? India is urbanizing very fast, Chennai definitely so, and everybody is moving from the rural areas into the cities. Should we really look for a scheme where people can afford to buy their own houses in the city, or should be looking at a more rental based system where people rent houses in the city and save enough money to buy houses in their wherever they came from into the city, since majority of the people in the city are coming from somewhere else? So just I thought I'll throw that open to the floor for the first round of discussions. Mr. Prakash.
Okay. Well, coming from a real estate developer, naturally, I would say that no, they should look at buying the home rather than going for a rental home. Okay. Because when you look at the EMIs, when you calculate and all that, see, when you look at the affordability of the houses, typically what we do is a thumb rule. We say that 40% of the disposable income should go towards paying the EMIs, which is more or less coming towards again your rental. So we always advise that it is cheaper for you to eventually to own a home rather than going for a rental home. But then the way the land costs have gone up, like what Dr. Rao has factored, when you look at the question of why the housing has become unaffordable, is because of the land costs. Land costs, as his slide also speaks very, very vividly, that the land cost consumes a lot of the cost of the housing. So when you look at it from that perspective, yes, the initial stages, rental housing makes a lot of sense, but then are they available at all in the first place? They are not available on a bulk in terms of a development which is happening across anybody, because any real estate developer, when you look at it, he is not interested in doing it. In fact, it was pleasantly a surprise that in July they came out with a affordable rental housing complex scheme and all that, which has come up just about. We have yet to get to know the details of it. So it is a good thing that rental housing is to be promoted. We have a lot of foreign FDI who is willing to come under that rental housing scheme, because a lot of pension funds are there who look at long-term leasing of large number of units. But then you should make it much more affordable in terms of for them to come in if they are looking at developing or looking at giving investments into that product. Now, government has to seriously think of doing some tax incentives if someone were to come and invest in this. See, to that extent, some time back, Government of India came out with a scheme called a 35AD scheme for the affordable housing scheme. Now, on paper, it is very interesting that yes, whatever you invest in the 35AD, that 100% tax exemption is there. But then they came out with a saying that it is for capital investment. Now, in any housing project, capital investment is hardly anything. It is the land which is a cost. They had not factored it. Subsequently, they went into MAT. They said that whatever income you are doing is that tax-free, no doubt, but you have to pay MAT. So it really, really defeats it. So Government of India has to seriously think of that way. What is it we are proposing? Are we really giving an incentive for somebody to come and do this? So rental housing is a fantastic thing, which we have proposed to the government of various state governments from CREDAI, saying that this is something which you guys should take it, because it's a government. Government can afford to do this. You have land and you do a PP model with a private developer and develop the land tract which is available to you. So that is the where I come from when it comes to rental housing from a home for urban areas which are getting developed. And as you rightly pointed out, there's a lot of migration which is happening, and enough of McKinsey report is there of 2008, which clearly says that over a period of time, the number of cities are going to grow rather than come down. That's my take, sir. I don't know what Mr. Rao has or Mr. Rajiv has to say on
Actually, if you look at the Indian context, buying a house is more than buying a house. It's an investment for the family for the next 50 to 100 years. So we are very culturally bound to buy a house. So rental always is a bent of mind, which is a very temporary. It's not permanent. We had cities like Belapur, Navi Mumbai, which were on the lease model. All the flats, and people want to, like, I bought apartments there, and I was, the moment the apartments got a certain value, I got out of that because I didn't want to invest in a leasehold land where the property was leasehold. So culturally, the mindset is I want something which is permanently mine forever, even if I don't live for that time. That's one issue. And now lease rentals have a small problem. The problem is most of the lease rentals are like Hiran and I tried on the Panvel highway. It's way away from anybody, any known human habitat. So how does one reach there? So then we have a TOD based development, transit oriented development. Then you have to create that infrastructure which we can reach those places. Like if you look at Amity University in Panvel, to reach that university, it takes 1.5 hours from for 7 kilometers because the road is hardly 10 to 15 feet. So idea is how does one look at balancing these options and look at the various scheme. In fact, if you look at the TDR SRA scheme initially which was started, I built for 4 million square feet SRA project in Pune city, where the problem was not construction, not land. The problem was people, unfortunately. So if when I build a building with glasses, after 15 days, all the glasses are broken by the inmates. The lift is broken down, vandalized, and there's a more of stakeholder management than of engineering or construction.
Yes.
Then issue comes that government is anyway taking land from me as a builder with 10% amenity space they're taking from me. And in Pune, Pune city or Bangalore city, the 10% amenity space the government is taking, 96% of that land area is not used at all because government has no place, no money to do it. Okay. So why don't you convert those amenity spaces into affordable housing projects? That's one. So government found a simpler way is the EWS. 10% of every project is EWS.
Yeah.
But then again, you have to create you create a divide between the society, rich and the poor. Now it looks quite obvious, and I mean it doesn't look so great about it. So now people are saying group housing, student housing. I was in UK not very long back, just before the COVID crisis. So everywhere in UK, Liverpool or Manchester, student group housing is the buzzword there. And now in India also we started chattering the same thing, student group housing. Without knowing the issues around it, how far the universities is. In a place like Northumbria, Newcastle, the university is 1 kilometer from any housing scheme. But in India, you might have to have a bus ride of one hour or 40 minutes from, because land is expensive. Then comes the issue of TDR. TDR, if all of you know, transfer development rights. So TDR is good if the land price and construction price is less than the TDR sold. But if the land price and construction price together is more than the TDR available, then you go for loss. So it's all mathematics actually. And the policies are as good as they are going to be implemented, believe me. I have built affordable housing schemes. As you say, it is not low cost housing, it is not low quality, but ultimately when we optimize on cost, somewhere we are cutting the corner, From the tile of 2 feet to 1 meter, 1 meter vitrified, we come to 1 feet, 1 feet non-vitrified tile. So I am anyway, and I'm smart. I can tell you in English great specifications which don't really mean anything on the ground, Okay, IPS flooring would mean just a plain cemented flooring, but it look very glamorous on my spec sheet. That's the issue. So we have to really look at, everybody here has thought about policies, but believe me, there's a lot of challenge on the ground, like excavation. We never know how much money goes in excavation. I'm just consulting a low cost affordable housing scheme just next to my house, and they hit a ground which has a density of, a bearing capacity of 15 tons per meter square. So they have go for piling. So 33% of the building cost is going in piling. How is it going to be affordable? So this is funny, but this is engineering, And engineering is not funny; it's serious because the building has to stand. Then we talk about it's in earthquake zone 4. There is a Richter scale. We have to cater for all the. India has around 1,200 IS codes in construction. So we have to follow half of them. Half of them are not really, nobody bothers. Half of them we don't bother about. But ultimately, if the OC comes in, I have to look at 45 approvals for getting OC. Okay. So this is all a nice jigsaw. So maybe somebody can add to it, Mr. Rao or Mr. Shivraman.
I can only say that you can't have a one-stop shop solution, as they call it, because particularly India being a very diverse nation, and the geography is also very, very different. So unlike most European situations, in India we are culturally diverse, and geographically also we are diverse, and therefore you can't have one solution that is going to solve all your problems. So you have to have a wide menu, and in different places you have to try out different things. So there is no one solution for affordable housing. Mr. Shivaraman, you have to
Your voice
unmute
is
yourself.
mute. You're muted, Mr.
So the one thing that kind of came up with all your discussions is the land cost is the single biggest by far issue with affordable housing. And one way of kind of reducing the land cost is to increase density, go up, which obviously it requires changes in code. But I don't think there is any engineering issue with going 40, 50 floors if necessary, if the cost can be brought down. But in that kind of a situation, how do we work on sustainability in terms of water, in terms of traffic, in terms of other amenities, if we are to really intensify or increase the density of housing?
Yeah, what happens is that as you go up, the cost of construction per square foot would come down up to a certain point, but then beyond that, again, it would start increasing for a wide variety of factors which you all know. So therefore, that alone is not the solution. And then there are one-time capital investment costs, and then there are recurring maintenance costs, like elevators, pumping water, and all those kinds of things. Maintenance, which Mr. Nehru had mentioned. So therefore, these will again add a lot to the maintenance. So that alone may not be the solution. You can have a mix of commercial with residential, and so on and so forth. So this will vary from place to place and from situation to situation. Right in the heart of the city, if land costs are so high, it may just not be feasible commercially. It will never be viable for you to go in for affordable housing right in the middle of the city. You have to go in for something else. So which means that affordable housing has to be seen also along with maybe cheap transportation. So you can't have it both ways. Have a very, very cheaply priced flat and have it located right in the middle of the city. So there have to be trade-offs, and then this will vary from place to place. Maybe a free bus service for all the affordable housing dwellers. That could be one way. Why people don't want to move out to the suburbs where you have apartments which are very reasonably priced is because they're not properly connected, or maybe there are no schools there. So the solutions lie elsewhere. The other thing is that it's not only giving a subsidy on the housing finance interest rates. You could even think of things like cutting down on your stamp duties. Affordable housing projects, you can give a drastic reduction in the stamp duty. You can also give a reduction in the property tax. So a whole array of incentives are possible.
Mr. Rao, I have, as you said rightly about the affordable housing can't be in the middle of city, you're right. But a lot of planning norms are funny, which I thought were funny, like the width of the road will decide the height of the building, 9-meter road, because you cannot have G+4, 15, 16 meter, you cannot. So that's you. So we are locking everybody in, and we are telling them let the cost come down. So if you're locking me on the road width vis-a-vis building height, then I am locked. You are locking me with the IS codes 456 to 800 to 1132, 114 to 1172, 7272. I am locked. You are locking with me all the regulations of the Act of the Cooperative Act. I am locked.
Yeah, all these have to change. That's what
Sir,
I've been saying. We need a major overhaul of the regulatory system.
Sir, when I go to MOA for my approval my building project, my cost goes up about 350 rupees a square foot if I have to follow everything what the MOA tells me to do that.
Yes.
So where is the cost coming down?
Yeah.
I think there is definitely a case for simplifying the regulation a lot. There is
certainly simplifying. It's not simplifying. You have to see there are a lot of norms which are cross-acting.
That is normal in Indian regulation. You never have straight line. You always have. It is a banyan tree. It is not a.
They're acting at cross purposes. So a rationalization is required, so that you will be able to get the best.
See what happened, Shivaraman, that in Tamil Nadu, let's talk of Chennai, because we are talking of Chennai. Chennai took a decision of doing transit-oriented development. So you have going completely away from the city, and you felt that, okay, this is the only way we will going to develop. But then you never thought about the transport facility at all. So you have a lot of government land within the city where government itself, in fact, we have given a lot of proposals from CREDAI itself. Like you take it, you have your foreshore estate, you have about a huge extent of land, around 80 acres or so. We said that, look, why don't you do a SRA kind of a development there, where you involve private-public transport, participation. Most of the slum development areas where very low rise buildings are there, and you have to monetize it by going in for a PPP model because you don't have the money. So this is where what happens is that the rental housing can come up there. In fact, when we did suggest to them, it was really shocking from the government side. They said that no, rental housing we don't want to do because we don't know how to collect rents. I said, if the government cannot collect rents, who does? I mean, you expect a private guy to collect rents by giving it to these people. So government also has to seriously think that, look, within the city, yes, we need workers. We need people who are like, what they have done in Delhi. Lutyens Delhi is fantastic development in terms of it. You have the large bungalows, and then you have entire service areas also built up behind itself, so that people are not moving around because you need the services which are required. So that kind of a thing is what the government of Tamil Nadu also has to do. But unfortunately, for whatever political reason, they don't want to take a decision. So it's more related to that. And of course, tweaking the regulations. If I am going to run around 50 to 60 permissions, run around for about a year or so to get my sanctions, where is affordability? There is no affordability.
And you have invested in the land upfront for that. So
Precisely.
your land,
So the
interest meter is running.
Holding cost. Holding cost for me. Whether it is JV or
RERA also is there. No, RERA also is there.
Now RERA is also there. But see, RERA will come in much later also now. Now there's an additional window which has come, honestly speaking.
Very true. Very true.
I
think the governments have a major role to play.
Sir, one small question here is, who owns the majority of land in our country? I think all of us know the answer.
Yeah, because
so
landlord.
Who makes the laws, they own that land. So they will make the laws as per their requirement, right? So I did work in Maharashtra 22 years. I thought half of the land belonged to one surname. I don't want to name the person here, but half of the land belonged to one person, and he never knew where the lands were. So I remember when I was in Reliance, the Bombay Pune Expressway alignment was changed because of somebody's land parcels were on alignment. So this can happen if government wants to. But issue is where are these schemes, affordable housing, are they just to popularize things around, or they are really to benefit people? If they are to benefit people, then a lot of, as Rao sir said and Mr. Chala said, we have to, as you said also, we have to ratify the entire process of registration, stamp duty. When township stamp duty is 2%, affordable housing should be not even 0.5%. So why don't we extend those policies to affordable housing? Okay.
In the United States of America, most states stamp duty is only 0.5%.
Unfortunately, in India, one of the largest income sources for the state governments is stamp duty. So there is a huge kind of vested interest there to not reduce stamp duty.
It's a major revenue for the state governments.
Yeah. See, when GST was introduced,
because of that, what happens in Haryana, nobody registers the land except the final occupant who wants to build a house with a family. So government loses it on anyway. So why not do it cheaper?
It's GPA to GPA to GPA. That's what is happening there.
Exactly.
So in fact, when GST was introduced itself, we said that you have to subsume the stamp duty with the GST so that it's a 1-point tax. Today you have a GST which is very high at 12%. Now, of course, they brought it down to 5% without ITC. And on top of it, again, you have to do registration. Like if you take Tamil Nadu is the costliest state in the country today.
Right.
You have a registration cost at 11%. You have an agreement cost of construction and registration at 2%, that is 13%. And on top of it, you have the registration, you have the GST of 5%. If it is an old project, then you can do even 12%. So that is the kind of a GST. So it is absolutely ridiculous the way the costing is. So your affordability is, to a large extent, when you look at the price point and look at it, where is it you are contributing in terms of the taxes to the government? So government has, seriously speaking, Shiv, very nice to talk about affordable housing. We want to do this. Even that ARHC, which has been introduced, Dr. Rao has just put up the program on, in July it has come. Let me tell you that even that will be a failure. Let me mark it on official record. I will tell you it will be a failure, because I know what happens when the fine print comes on the taxation benefits they are talking about. See, when they introduced the 35AD, it's a classic case. After introducing 35AD, they said affordable housing, you can go ahead and do it. Then finally they said MAT will come. So what the heck is happening?
That kills it. No,
That kills
I don't think any development based on a tax incentive in India will work.
Correct.
Because I don't think any investor or any developer is willing to trust the government long term on tax.
Correct.
So there is always a fear that 5 years from now the tax law will change.
Correct.
And you will not be grandfathered in, and then you are left high and dry. I think we need to agitate for, if there is a subsidy upfront, so that we know that we have got it.
Precisely. So we tell them that, okay, if you want to do serious about it, you see, you came out with the government came out with the policy of housing for all by 2022. Let me tell you that I can go on record and say that even 2032, it cannot happen. If you are not clear about what are your policies, what you want to deliver. So that's how you have to look at it from that perspective. So be clear what you want.
Yeah, the one slight deviation from housing as it stands, but kind of going closer to COVID, which is that this time we have realized the criticality of the migrant labor.
Yes.
And we have realized their housing, the non-availability of housing for them. So what is it that we can do? What is it that states and cities, especially a city like Chennai, which depends heavily on migrant labor, what is it that we can do? Because we have seen failures. Like, for example, Singapore has these huge, should we say, shared accommodation for housing for migrant labor. And they've had a lot of COVID cases transmission because there's a very dense, closed kind of environment. Similar problems I've seen in, not so much in Dubai because they did a good job, but in Oman, where we are doing some projects, we've had similar issues with the accommodation for migrants. So what is it that we can do on that front?
See, sometime way back in 2010 to 11, they introduced a thing called labor cess. They said that 2% labor cess has to be paid, 1% labor cess has to be paid on the construction cost of all the projects.
Yeah, I know.
So developers have ended up paying.
I cry every time I write the check.
Okay, you understand very clearly. So close to around 60 to 80,000 crores has been collected across the country, and each state has got a lot of money. In fact, when COVID came in fact, last 5 years, we've been chasing the government of India that this labor cess was collected with the intent that you are going to create rental housing scheme by way of for the workers or the migrant workers at every city and every town and all that. And those places, the developers can take them on hire and keep all the labor there in a proper camps and with a proper hygiene and all that stuff. Right now, large developers, we are all having our own camps and we are keeping them in a safe condition. But everybody doesn't do that. At small sites and all that, it is not possible. So you engage them and then you hire it out. So we said that, look, this is the amount which is being collected. And all these monies were kept in FD account. So finally, we chased the government saying that CREDAI will take over these things. You please give us a contract because we'll build it for you and give you. And then we'll hire from you. And it is a fantastic scheme. They didn't do that. So when COVID came in, you know what they did? They decided that, okay, fine, we will give you subsidy. So the 1,000 rupees and 500 rupees per head, which they disbursed, they allowed the state governments to disburse from there during the lockdown period. So I don't know how much money is available at all today if they have to do it. In Chennai, since you are specific about Chennai, they did do 2 large camps. In fact, with Mr. Nasimuddin, I was just talking to him. He did say that, yes, we have to do, but then the camps have to be spread all around. They can't be located in one location, and it is so difficult for them to be transported from that point to the other developers. So why would anybody see, a developer looks at it, what will be the cost for me if I have to transport the labor from point A to my site? So that was not very viable. So we told them, look, you have to disburse the entire thing. So it is doable, provided the government is serious about it. Government land is available, which they can try to do it. That's what is our take.
Basically, land is available, money is available, only the will is not available.
Precisely. That's all.
One small point here, sometimes these proactive state governments are also a problem, because I heard a report in the morning today about UP. 1.25 crore workers have gone back to UP, and the UP government has given all of them jobs, unfortunately. They have given them low-cost, affordable housing projects to live in, and they have given them Manrega, which anyway was there. And then the problem is in Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh. Where will the workers come from? So sometimes the proactive governments have a problem as well.
No, but I don't think that will last, because I don't think they have the money for that. So anyhow,
Yeah, probably. Let's see.
it will run for a few months and then it will be out of sight again.
See, probably.
Anyhow, I think we are kind of already half an hour beyond our scheduled time.
Okay.
So if there's nothing else, I'd like to bring the session to a close. Thanks you all. Thank you all for
Thank you.
Thank you very
joining
much.
us today.
Just
Thank
one
you,
minute.
Michaela, Diana. Hopefully we come and see Belfast, and I definitely will come back and see Vienna
Absolutely.
once
Vienna.
the lockdown is over.
Vienna is a great place. Yeah.
Yes.
Just request
Belfast
everyone just
also.
to stay back for a few seconds more to take a group photo. Michela, you can probably unmute your videos and come on the thing. We'll just quickly take a group photo.
Screenshot.
Thank every.
Oh, you are taking a
Yeah,
screenshot
I know
also.
that-
Wow.
Screenshot.
Yeah, I know. So while I thank every speaker here and every participant and every partnering organization, the US Green Building Council, US National Institute of Urban Affairs, New Delhi, European Union Knowledge Network, Hague, Ansal University and Shishon School of Planning and Research Studies Association UK, and our own counterpart Bombay Chamber, who had their AGM today morning, 184th AGM like ours. So thanks everyone, and just we will catch up again. We understand a lot more needs to be done. We will compile the thing and share with you and take more comments from you. And now I request all of you to be there for a group photo. Mr. Rao, just work 2 more seconds if I can see. Madhu,
sure,
can you
sure.
arrange quickly?
How do you do this?
No, they will do it.
Okay.
Yeah, we are doing it. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Diana, if you can join.
Thank you.
And
Thank you all.
Ishila. Yeah.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Have a good day.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
a lot. Have a good, safe day and night.
Be safe.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Yeah, one sec. Yeah, they are there. Please.
Yeah.
And my team can also join if you are available.
Thanks. No.
Okay, I understand.
We've taken.
Okay.
We've taken. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
sir.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.